It's my belief that in a man's life there are moments that are indelibly etched in memory. Slivers of time, like those first few wonderful seconds as a boy, as he wobbles and then he steadies himself on a bicycle, realizing that the bruises and the scratches were well worth the cost of such glorious freedom riding a bicycle. Oh, there are moments like the first kiss from a pretty girl and the devastation of hearing words like, "Well, George, I like you as a friend, but..." Then there's the memory of the first time you saw your child, and you knew you were a father at last. Oh, there must be thousands of memories which lie beneath the surface of a man's consciousness, and some of them never discussed with anyone, not even a wife, because some things are best left alone. I guess they're just too personal. But there are other memories, too, which are powerful and wonderful. And they lie sleeping like the buttercup bulbs which lie dormant beneath the brown grass in my front yard. And every year, on some sunny and windy Sunday afternoon in March, they always spring up. I stop to take notice of their beauty and to remember some words from my father. "George, let's build a kite." Hey, was this my father talking or what? March is always the best time to make a kite, It didn't sound like Bob Spear, my father, the disciplinarian, the perfectionist, the man who never allowed any horseplay between my brother and I during spring planting. In fact, there was no room at all for what a 10-year-old like me called fun when you were working with Daddy in the field. But this was the Sabbath. It was Sunday, the only day during the week that Dad would relax, and he was actually wanting to do something with me. "Find us some newspapers," he said. And he headed out into the pasture to find some sticks to use. Well, I knew that kites were only $1 at Coons and Coleman, and Dad knew they were there too. But this was going to be something he built, something he created, something to tie him to his childhood. And kites couldn't be bought, you see, because they couldn't be afforded. Well, I would watch him mix flour with hot water to create a paste, something to glue the paper to the sticks. And again I knew, and he knew, that there was store-bought glue in our house. But this was the way Bob Spear learned to build a kite when he was a boy, and he had learned it from his father. And what I was watching was Bob Spear sharing an experience with me, reliving his childhood. Well, with his case knife, I watched him cut and tie the string to the triangular-shaped contraption. Oh, it looked everything but graceful, everything but capable of flying. It looked so crude. And yet, with old rags torn in strips and tied together, I watched him form the tail for that kite. And into the mid-afternoon sun and the gusting winds in our front yard, I watched him maneuver that kite higher and higher, almost out of sight. And I remember standing beside him, watching his big hands work the string back and forth, give and take, making the kite climb. He'd laugh and he'd say, "George, here, you take it. You can do it. Here, just keep the string tight in your hand like this now, and if you feel any slack now, you'll know it's beginning to fall, so keep it tight." And that's the way my dad, I think, lived his life, pulled tight, always working hard, always living by a rigid set of rules. And for all my life, it seemed that Dad was a civil servant who worked in a warehouse up there in Redstone. That's all I knew. And when he came home at night and sat in his big chair, I always crawled up into his lap and worked my right hand down inside his shirt pocket while we talked. Usually he'd stop at a Morgan store at Baldwin and he'd buy me some bubble gum or candy, and it always went into his shirt pocket. But one night something unusual was sticking out of that pocket, and I pulled it out. It was a big black shiny pen, ballpoint pen, with small white lettering on the side that read, "Property of U.S. Government." I asked my dad about the pen. He looked embarrassed, as though he had been caught doing something wrong. "It was a mistake, George," he said. I've got to take it back. It belongs to the U.S. government." Well, when he came home the next night, I said nothing, but I looked to see if he had forgotten, and brought that bright, shiny pen home again. But he hadn't. And I looked the next night, and the night after that, and the night after that, and every night for weeks. Not once during that year or the years that followed did I ever see him bring home anything that belonged to that U.S. government he kept talking about. Well, my dad had spent several years in a reform school when he was just a boy, and that experience had toughened him. A bout with malaria during World War II had almost killed him. And there was a silent strength that my dad possessed, and it was never more evident than in the way he controlled that kite. "Here, George," he'd say, "you take the string." Well, he'd stand behind me and reach around me to guide my hands in the gentle give and take motion of keeping the string tight and that kite up in the sky and airborne. I guess maybe I spent 3 more such afternoons in my childhood with Dad. Not many, but enough to appreciate what he was sharing with me. They were rare moments of laughter and the sort of excitement he must have felt as a young boy, and I was witness to that. And I miss my dad, but the memories and the lessons he taught me about life are still with me, and some of them are like those buttercup bulbs outside right now. All it takes to revive them is a warm Sunday afternoon in March, and maybe even a strong wind.